I'm going to introduce Professor Marco Pignatti from Carpi. He's a dermatologist.
We are waiting for the slides to set in. He's a very special dermatologist. He's different from others because he treats skin conditions and disorders starting from the gut. And he also has devised dermobiotics, giving it its new discipline a structure, and he will talk about this later. He's a very precise and very sensitive person. He also practices plastic medicine, that is to say plastic surgery, so he really deals with inner and outer beauty. So the slides are ready, and I leave you with Marco Pignatti, MD, dermatologist. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Di Modugno for inviting me here, and also Sandro Santalini is also from my city, Carpi. My baker is present with the bread, Primo's bread. I'm gonna let him talk later. First of all, I would like to bring you through a trip with 5 steps. We start from the bottom to get to the top, so from vice versa, so from the brain to the gut through skin. Complex systems are not just the juxtaposition of simple parts, but to understand all the parts, we have to understand everything. There are many relationships between parts that are because of the fact that these parts work together. There are many pathologies that we have to consider that are linked with the psyche. And this book by Professor Bassi, the girl that I was during my specialization in dermatology, it tried to make a link between psyche and skin. The skin is an organ with many psychological links. It's a barrier because it stopped us from being a unity, so between us and the external world. It also gives us idea of a limited human being, but it gives us also the contact with other parts of the world. And it represents what we see, what other people see of us, and it can be modified by other elements of our characteristics, of our character, like getting red or any other experience of emotions. Aesthetic medicine, so plastic medicine, is going to help us to make better express ourselves. So eliminate those elements that are linked to aging, like wrinkles, but also tattoos or makeup. And they have very strong and ancient roots. This dermatologist, Grismer, in 1978, he was a psychiatrist and a dermatologist. He decided to study elements and links between the many conditions of the skin and emotions, and also the time between pathogen and emotions itself. There are many, just a few seconds, and later on those that take like weeks or months before they are expressed. The Grismer index, it connected 100% like the hyperhidrosis with stress, like others that require, for example, 2 weeks or even a month to be represented and be exposed on the skin. Urticaria is one of the many pathologies, the psychosomatic pathologies that we have to understand, because it's not so easy to express anger, anxiety, depression. Some characteristics can be linked to many of these pathologies, but many stress and pathogens are present everywhere. For example, the AD, or the fiery emotions that appear on the surface that we're not able to truly express them. And we talk about social context and families situation. there are many others difficult relationship, for example, with the mother. Another element is the acne. For example, in teens, especially from the psychological point of view, there is an expression of the changing body, and to express ourselves and also to be in front of people can create acne. Another problem with psoriasis, it's linked to stress and the attempt to create an armor, a protecting armor. So, because there are many people saying that psoriasis appear on the head or in any part, so it's like creating a protecting armor to protect, as we can say, parts of our body, of ourselves. Others diseases like autoimmune diseases are linked always to rupture, destruction, problems with school, family, but also positive stress, like the birth of a little brother. But most of the time, they're linked to stress situations. Platon said that the biggest mistake of doctors of our time is, and I don't think there are many changes up to the time of Platon, is that we keep mind and body separated, while PNAIE, like Dr. Biava said, we have to understand psychology, neurology, endocrinology, and immunology. So all the elements working together. It's a technique presentation in my thesis that I decided to present, Dr. Franceschi. There a deep connection. At the time, they were discovered this deep connection, and they started from precise mediators. So information elements that are changed and exchanged between the two parts and the many parts, so between the endocrine system and the nervous system, they communicate with these common words. Skin is a psychoneuroendocrino-immunologist organ, yes, because hormones and other elements are important for the transmitting elements information, and they can be linked also to emotions. There, as we saw before, the second step and all the diseases there are linked to these and these pathologies that we can, in this one, we can see differentiations. For example, urticaristemia. That's where a biggest interest, a rising interest appeared, and it's the most important target for pharmaceutical companies. We can act directly on the disease. There are many hormones, cytokines. I don't want to get into details. Acne has been discovered to be influenced by hormones and other hormonal index for many years, even nowadays. Teens that have acne are treated with drugs generally. Psoriasis as well, we have discovered that there are many cytokines, and in the case of psoriasis, the latest research showed us that there are many molecules pro-inflammatory that have to be considered, because that's something on which pharmaceutical companies work. They can find a very happy field to work on, and they can work on this pathway. Autoimmune diseases have neurotransducers, hormones, but patients come and sometimes they come and they ask me, doctor, perhaps it's something that I'm eating that's causing me so many problems. So they think that diet is at the basis of those diseases. And dermatologist doesn't like when someone asks him or her this question, because they always think about drugs and idea of molecules. So there are not many researches in this field, but in reality is how it works. And many pathologies for which patients think there is a link between diet and these problems are linked especially to dermatosis with dietary problems. So it's something that I'm really eating. So we're talking about urticarias, allergies, diet intolerances, because we have, and for that we ran many tests, examinations to find out the top and the most important pathology. We did many tests like prick, rust on skin, blood, and many intolerances tests. But at the end, after we get rid of all these culprit food, we can say, the patient was not eating all these foods, and it was creating new allergies, new intolerances. Gluten-linked dermatitis. There are many disorders like dermatitis that can be solved by eliminating gluten, and that's something that was really helpful to help people with these problems. But especially for those that are allergic, if there is a gluten intolerance, they can also develop other, like gluten intolerances and allergies, so they can get into a shock, anaphylactic shock, and because they didn't have the first symptoms at the beginning. The AD is linked to food. It's not caused by food, but it is with food. Acne as well can be linked to diet and dietary problems, especially for hydrocarbons, for an imbalance in fatty acids. So they're all linked to food. Psoriasis as well, a lot are caused by diet problems, and science shows us and doesn't give, in reality, science doesn't give really good answers in this field, because patients try a lot of diet, and in fact, dietary problems are very prevalent in patients with psoriasis. And so patients, after changing their diet, they feel better, much better. But then they can fall back. And by using these diets, they can see an improvement in their health. These Scandinavian researchers were able to show the link between pathologies and food. So food is not the culprit, but organism is answering to a signal that is sent by some food, some type of food, and this food causes allergies and intolerances. So we don't have to get rid completely of this culprit food, but we have to understand why there is an inflammation. We are what we are made. We are what we eat. Food is a medicine. Food that human being ate for thousands and thousands of years is not possible. It's causing these problems now. So for psychoneuroendocrine immunology, the same author 20 years later published a new book that is the wisdom of the second brain, and he's talking about the second brain. So I want to understand what are these two brains, and he's asking, and I'm asking myself, what is the first brain? We use the first, the second one, the first vowel, the second one. So the first brain is the most ancient one in relationship with the one that we consider the first brain, with protozoa that have 500 million years. They have a mouth, an anus, they have tentacle to get in touch with other parts, but they don't just have an intestine. But is also the first one to be presented in the embryon, so the fecunded cell. And later on in the gastralization, we have something that creates a tube, where the inner layer is going to produce the stomach and then the anus. in the embryogenesis, we have a problem of creation in the creation of the intestine, considering that the intestine is the most ancient organ in the human body. So these two brains talk together, they work together, even with their main neurotransductors. The bidirectional connection, if there is a TBI, probably is going to be later on, a couple of days later, is going to be also a stomach failure, and vice versa. If there is a stomach inflammation, we're going to have problem with brain. Especially for Dr. Maniardi studying especially the connection with seizures. Stomach mediators work together as much as neurotransmitters like serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. They are produced in the intestine, and the precursors come from the first intestine. And we cannot produce these elements if we don't eat them, we can say swallow them. The immune system is linked to the intestines, of course. It's the first layer that we have to have a contact, we can say, with the external world. And for these antigens that are introduced with the digestive system, what we have to absorb, what we have to eliminate. So we have to create all the immune system, and not just the one linked to the intestine and one linked to the mucosa. So the bowel functions is not just digesting, we can say, the one that we give for granted, but we have to understand all the matter, the energy that are functional for the intestine movements, but also the immunity defense and tolerance, prevent infection, so protect ourselves from what can be a damage, and also take back what's important for us. Nowadays, we have more information on for the regulation of the systems. So homeostasis and it's working, we can say, it's work. We have to understand more our intestine. Intestine has a thinner layer than skin, has a bigger, we can say, surface because of villi. It's so the skin surface is less than the one linked to the intestine, so the epithelium, and all the parts that are inside this situation.
Even though it is a simpler barrier from the anatomical point of view, it is actually more complex than the skin. Since I'm a dermatologist, I always draw comparisons with the skin because some things actually leak in the inner gut. The gut is actually some sort of external barrier in our body, so it is a selective barrier, whereas the skin has to keep everything outside and to retain water, so it does not really have such complicated functions as the gut has. So the function of the gut is a very important therapeutical objective. When the gut is leaky, it means that this barrier does not function properly anymore. So this can be caused by several reasons, in which we have stress, for example, or gut inflammation, joint damage, so that the gut actually becomes leaky. And so it allows into the bloodstream many toxins and cytotoxins that elicit an immune response. And in the gut, the result is an increase of the inflammation with a vicious circle that sets in with different consequences. And actually, we are finding these consequences throughout the research. For example, pathogens that elicit an immune response and that also have to do with the expression of cytokines that are pro-inflammatory and that bring to autoimmune diseases, but also imbalance in the endocrine system, mood alterations, and the signals that the gut sends to the brain, so that the brain actually has cravings, for example, for sugar or carbs, and with a different series of pathologies that are very, very widespread in these years, with different consequences skin-wise. It is very difficult to have a beautiful glowing skin if your gut is actually in a disrupted balance, is out of balance. So beautiful skin is seldom found in people with GI tract disorders. So let's make this journey. If we ask acne or AD, atopic dermatitis patients, then we found that maybe they have abdominal distension, nausea, vomiting, or leaky gut syndrome for acne patients, and so on. Or the SIBO, which is the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, which is more frequent in acne patients as well. Then psoriasis patients very, very often has intestinal and GI tract disorders. In fact, many Crohn's disease pharmaceuticals are often involved in the treatment of psoriasis as well. Many of these patients have high blood level of triglycerides or glycemia, and they also have coexisting diseases. So these patients are very unlucky, we could say. Many other patients, like the ones with autoimmune diseases, as we have seen, in fact, autoimmunity develops in the gut, are involved. So any further progress in gastroenterology, and I should say in medicine as a whole, in the next decade will have to deal with the knowledge and control of gut permeability first, as Gasparini said. We have also seen that the complex barrier is made up of enterocytes, which is the intestinal cells and junctions, microbiota, phlegm, and so on. And the main role is actually held by the gut flora, the gut microbiota. And it is made up of a great population of beneficial bacteria, and let alone viruses, fungi, and protozoa that are all beneficial and are responsible for the balance and smooth functioning of our digestive and immune system. Their properties are really startling. We have, for example, 1,000 billion cells, but the number of our bacterial cells is 10 times higher than that. And they're just present in our gut. If we gather them together, they're very, very little, but actually they are a lot more in number than our heart cells or than our liver cells and so on. So this organ is actually underrated. There's not a lot of research done on it. But at an epigenetic point of view, we can say that, for example, there are a lot of strains, different strains, like more than 500 bacterial strains, and genes are the components of bacteria that produce and release proteins that are responsible for different functions, and these genes probably modulate and shape our own genome, and they make some gene expression functions possible for our body. So we really have to take them seriously and take care of them. These bacteria in the gut flora are often good bacteria, beneficial bacteria, but there are also many pathogens, many bad bugs in our gut, but they live in balance. We see here a logarithmic graded scale. So here we can see that bad pathogens actually do not disrupt our balance if they are outnumbered by the good bacteria. For example, Candida and other fungi, they may outnumber the beneficial bacteria if there are some disruptions, and then go on and cause damage to our gut. So this composition in the microbiota is very much changed throughout our lives and the phases of our life. For example, it is very different in a baby that is born with a C-section or natural delivery. And then we've got, for example, differences in breastfed or formula-fed children, and so on. This bacteria really are responsible for a lot of functions. They elicit stimulus in the gut and the immune system because they are self-differentiated genes. So they promote our the development of our tolerance. For example, they keep our gut healthy, they clean it, and they're also very important because they make some things that we cannot do alone. They fulfill some functions that we couldn't do without them. For example, some protein synthesis. They also have a barrier function because they are there in order to prevent other pathogens to take their place and so be pathogens. They also help us flush out toxins and so on. And something that probably we still do not really know of their functions yet out there to be discovered. So in this PNEI system, we also have to include the gut and the gut microbiota, and we also have to, we definitely have to talk about gut-brain-skin axis, which is linked to all these pathologies and disorders that if we gather them together, then we notice that they are very widespread in our Western culture and countries, and those who are in the process of coming together with us. So this is something that is very quickly widespread, and it has to be epigenetic process. When all these functions are not in balance, then we talk about dysbiosis. Dysbiosis can be, for example, an overgrowth of pathogens, or for example, the loss of other strains of bacteria. And this actually affects our GI tract composition. So dysbiosis can really have different causes. Once again, there is stress, and then a diet, course of antibiotics, and many foods that probably cause problems in some patients, and that can also cause skin problems. Then there is our hygiene fad, the fact that we also have to sterilize everything, that we are really on a high for hygiene, that we have to sterilize newborns and so on. In this way, we actually throw out good bacteria as well as bad bacteria. So dysbiosis sets in when all these pathologies are present. For example, autoimmune diseases, joint and muscle pain, depression, dyslipidemia, diabetes, and also some psychological pathologies like depression, autism, schizophrenia, because there is a bidirectional link between the gut and the brain. Then we have, of course, chronic fatigue, asthenia, or irritability, anxiety, and so on. All of these are disorders that are somehow linked to gut dysbiosis as well. And as we have said before, these neurotransmitters that we consider neurotransmitters are produced in a healthy gut by these amino acids that we introduce in our body with the diet. For example, serotonin, that is the feel happy hormone, then dopamine, that makes us very swift, then adrenaline and noradrenaline, that helps our mental clarity and physical strength. But this is all like that only if you have dysbiosis. If this balance is disrupted and we have dysbiosis, then, for example, tryptophan can be morphed into indole or skatole, and we can find that in some urine tests, for example. And this affects also the synthesis of serotonin and melatonin. There is a lack of dopamine, then we have Alzheimer's disease or chronic disease, and so on. Serotonin, for example, has the function of making us feel happy and to have a sense of peace of mind, but it actually has many other functions as well. For example, then we have nicotine and serotonin and so on, many other hormones that regulate, for example, thermoregulation or intestinal functions. When there is stress or dysbiosis or a cortisol imbalance, then all these reactions are disrupted, and the stress, which is a positive reaction of our body, actually becomes a chronic stress. So it actually impairs cellular respiration, and of course our sense of well-being is not, it's not that fundamental. We also can very normally feel stressed out in a particular situation, but not as at a chronic level. That would be pathologic. Then we have immunity related dysbiosis, and the immune system reacts in an altered way. We can develop oversensitivities or autoimmune disease. So microbiome and the gut could also be a link for between the brain and the skin. This is the last phase of our journey. Everything has been thought of before, but the difficult thing is to think of it again, once again. And I say this because these things I've discovered after this. Actually, this work has been done in 1930s, and these two dermatologists had studies the effect on the skin of emotional and nervous states, and they had theorized a gastrointestinal network and mechanism. So that there definitely was the idea of a gut-brain axis already. And this emotional states that can actually alter the normal microflora, the way that the gut microbiome was termed back then. And so this can all alter the leakiness and the permeability of the gut. And this work has been done in 1930, and they were pioneers, we can say, in this research. And so we have a network, we can say, that is better termed than axis, I should say. So a gut-brain axis, a gut-brain-skin axis. So stress, an unhealthy diet, antibiotics, and so on can bring to inflammation, dermatosis, dysbiosis, which once again generates stress and skin conditions. Also, depression can lead to an unhealthy diet. So it is all an interconnected, intertwined network. And here we got our skin disorders, and we should see if they have a sort of relation with the microbiome. And it has been found that an imbalance and low diversity in the gut microbiota during the first month of a baby's life is linked to allergies as well as in early childhood. And it is also linked to asthma in early childhood and school age. But actually, some years, like 5 or 6 years, can pass before these disorders can manifest themselves. Then we also have the passage from the mother to the baby with a natural birth. The mother actually passes some of her microbiome to the baby, and so on. The gene hypothesis or lost friend theory has been done in studies that actually wanted to theorize the contrary, the opposite thesis. They initially wanted to demonstrate that more dirty children actually developed more allergies and so on. But they actually demonstrated the opposite thing, that people that lived in farms, in contact with animals and dirt, actually developed less allergies and sensitivities. So not just environmental microbes and bugs, but also gut microbes and bugs can affect this mechanism. So these symbiotic microbes have to be there, because otherwise there would be a loss of immune tolerance and defect in the mechanism. For example, formula feeding has been proved to lead to a higher proliferation of Clostridium difficile bacteria, and it actually promotes atopic dermatitis in children. But if we administer some lactic acid bacteria or bifidobacteria in children, we can actually shape a different response in a positive way also in adult life, and that would increase the quality of life index. All this would have been a result of oral administration of probiotics. In atopic dermatitis in children, for example, there some pro-inflammatory cytokines are produced, and we actually investigated them as a sign and manifestation of the disease for atopic dermatitis. But the administration of E. coli Nissel strain actually induced the immunoregulatory mechanisms in allergen-induced dermatitis, at least in laboratory mice experimentation. So if we administer this ECN in pregnant women and then in a newborn, we actually can dramatically reduce this atopic dermatitis onset and other skin diseases. In acne patient, more than half of the patients actually proved to have disruptions in their gut flora, but lactobacillus administration can have an anti-inflammatory action. We always have used antibiotics for treating acne. We still do that. But let's have a look here in the slide what happens to the gut diversity and the flora after just one single week of antibiotics. And what we have here is that all the diversity in the gut microflora is actually swept out. And after 1 week, a little bit of diversity is promoted. But after as long as 24 months, the previous diversity is still not reestablished. So to treat one skin disorder with a course of antibiotics actually can have long-term effects that are side effects, negative effects.
In rosacea, we saw that there is a role of the intestinal microbiota, especially for the skin one rather than the intestinal one. And the introduction of the microbiota is not only present in the gut, because all over our skin, we have bacteria and microbiota. So we have to analyze every single one of this microbiota. And obviously there are many differences, like the skin ones change according to the weather or cold and hot weather. But there are many microbiota linked to rosacea, and rosacea is more present in those that have these problems. So by correcting the small intestine bacterial overgrowth, we can solve over rosacea. In seborrheic dermatitis, we see that there is an equal distribution of microbiota. We always thought that this disease was caused by fungi, but in reality is linked to bacteria and fungi that are already present on the skin. So the imbalance between the different species that cause they make these bacteria pathogens, and so not by destroying these pathogens but by curing them we can solve the problem. In psoriasis as well, we have a similar microbiota to the one that we observed in the intestine. So there is not a coincidence that the same flora is affecting not only the gut but also the skin. And we have many probiota that's gonna help disinflame the skin. Not only with autoimmune diseases, but also with others, not only the one that I show you today, but many others. By curing an intestinal inflammatory, we can help the autoimmune system and solve the problem. So, what the World Health Organization consider as definition of health, it's very different from the one that we consider as dermatologists. So it's not just get rid of the disease, but to get rid of symptoms. Is to find a balance, a perfect balance between mind, all the other organs and the other system to get to a state of well-being. This is a quote, not a very scientific one. But one cannot think well, love well, sleep well if he has not dined well. Is very perfect in this context, and I would like to thank you very much.
Grazie al dottor Pignatti.
Thank to Dr. Pignatti, dermatologist, that actually enlightened us on the deep link on what